The soft murmur of voices in the conference room faded as I slipped into the hallway, phone buzzing insistently in my hand. I glanced down, heart lifting for a moment when I saw it was Brandon, my husband. We had been married for almost 7 years. I expected the usual small talk, maybe a quick, "When are you coming home?" or "How's the trip?" Instead, the voice that came through was cold, smug, triumphant. "I'm divorcing you, Meredith," Brandon said without preamble. "And just so you know, I already sold the house. You can start packing." For a moment I could not breathe. The hallway around me seemed to spin, the conference room's muted buzz a distant hum. "You sold the house?" I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "Yeah," he said, laughing under his breath. "Me and Jenna need the money. You know, for our future together." Jenna. I had suspected. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden defensiveness when I asked where he had been. But hearing her name on his lips, so casually tossed into my world like a grenade, still stung. "Sounds wonderful," I said, voice smooth as silk. "I hope you two will be very happy." I ended the call without waiting for his response. Inside my heart was pounding, but not from sorrow, from something colder, sharper. Because there was one thing Brandon had clearly forgotten. The house, our beautiful ivy-covered 3-bedroom in the suburbs, had been refinanced 6 months ago, and when it had, the deed had been quietly, officially and legally placed under my name alone. Brandon had signed the papers without reading them, eager to get a lower interest rate I had negotiated. He thought he could sell what he no longer owned, and he was about to learn just how badly he had miscalculated. I stood in the hallway for a long moment after the call ended, letting the anger roll through me like a wave, but when the wave receded, it left something stronger behind. Clarity. I was not going to cry. I was not going to rage. I was going to win. I returned to the conference room, sat through the remainder of the meeting with a polite smile and nodded at all the right moments. But my mind was elsewhere. Plotting, calculating. That evening, back in my hotel room, I called Natalie, my attorney and oldest friend. "He thinks he sold the house," I said calmly, pacing the room, "to pay for his future with his new girlfriend." There was a pause on the other end, then Natalie's low chuckle. "And he forgot he does not own it anymore," she said. "Exactly," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. Natalie got serious fast. "We need to act quickly," she said. "First we notify the supposed buyer, then we send Brandon a formal letter explaining that any sale is invalid, and if he took money already, he is facing fraud charges." The word fraud sounded delicious. "What about the divorce?" I asked. "That will come next," she assured me. "But first we make sure you keep the house, your financial security, and your dignity." I hung up feeling a rare sense of calm. Not devastation, not fear, a quiet, powerful certainty. Brandon had tried to blindside me. He had no idea I had been preparing for months, not for betrayal necessarily, but for the growing realization that the man I married was no longer someone I could trust. It was not the affair that truly broke my heart. It was the cruelty. The glee he had shown in telling me, as if destroying my life was a prize he had earned. I would let him have his moment. It would make his fall even more satisfying. The next day, Natalie sent letters to both Brandon and the real estate agent who had supposedly brokered the illegal sale. The response from the buyer came within hours. Shocked, embarrassed, more than willing to cooperate once they realized Brandon had no legal right to sell the property. Natalie assured them they would not be blamed. The only party at fault was Brandon. Meanwhile, Brandon's response was silence. No phone calls, no angry texts, just silence. I could imagine him frantically trying to figure out how the plan had unraveled, how the confident victory speech he had rehearsed had turned to dust in his mouth. It was almost poetic. As I finished my work trip, flying back toward my home, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was not returning to plead. I was returning to claim what was already mine. The cab ride from the airport felt strangely peaceful. The city blurred past the windows, golden under the setting sun. I watched familiar streets pass by with a strange detachment, as if I had already stepped into a new life, one where I was no longer tied to a man who saw me as disposable. When the driver pulled up in front of the house, I took a slow breath. Home. Still mine. I paid the fare and stepped out, rolling my suitcase up the walkway. The front door was unlocked. Typical Brandon, always careless with things that mattered. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Brandon's leather jacket was thrown over the arm of the couch. His sneakers were scattered by the door. The kitchen sink was full of dirty dishes. It looked like someone still living there. Someone who thought he still had time, still had control. I set my suitcase down, walked to the dining table. and pulled out the documents Natalie had prepared. I laid them out carefully. Deed of ownership, notification of invalid sale, formal divorce papers. Every piece lined up like chess pieces ready for the final move. I was sitting calmly at the table when I heard the front door slam. Heavy footsteps pounded across the floor, then Brandon appeared, face flushed, phone clutched in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving a printed email in the air. "Sit down, Brandon," I said quietly. He ignored me, pacing like a caged animal. "You ruined everything," he spat. "The deal was almost done. Jenna and I already picked out a place. Now the buyer is threatening to sue me." I raised an eyebrow. "You should have read the fine print," I said, tapping the deed with one finger. "You signed away any claim to this house when we refinanced." He blinked, thrown off. "What are you talking about?" I slid the deed across the table toward him. "You agreed to transfer the property into my name. You signed it. You were too busy checking your fantasy football scores to bother reading the papers." His mouth opened and closed. For once, he was speechless. "You cannot just do this," he said finally, voice rising. "You cannot just kick me out." "I can," I said evenly, "and I am." I pushed the divorce papers across the table. "You will leave. You will sign these. Or Natalie and I will make sure the fraud charges stick, and you will have far bigger problems than losing your girlfriend's dream condo." Brandon stared at the papers. I saw the exact moment the fight left him. His shoulders sagged, his hand fell to his side. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice dropping into something almost pitiful. "We had good times, Meredith. We can fix this." I stood slowly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "You ended this, Brandon," I said. "When you chose to sell my home behind my back, when you laughed about leaving me homeless." I met his eyes, calm and steady. "You made your choice. Now you live with it." Brandon left that night. No yelling, no scenes, just a slammed door and the sound of a car pulling away into the darkness. I stood alone in the quiet house, feeling the weight of his departure settle over me like a warm blanket. I was not broken. I was free. And the life I was about to rebuild would be stronger, brighter, and far more beautiful without him. The first morning after Brandon left felt strangely still. I woke early, sunlight spilling across the bedroom floor, no longer filtered through Brandon's clutter of sports memorabilia and discarded laundry. The silence that once would have felt heavy now felt like a luxury, a beginning. I pulled on a soft sweater and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The coffee tasted richer, smoother somehow, without the tension that had hung between us for so long. I took my mug to the living room, curling up in the oversized chair by the window. From there, I could see the garden we had never gotten around to finishing. The patch of earth I had once dreamed would bloom with hydrangeas and roses. It would now, on my terms. Later that day I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. The first order of business was clearing out every trace of Brandon. The ugly metal and glass coffee table he had insisted on buying during our first year together, gone. The oversized leather recliner he had spent countless hours lounging in while ignoring my attempts at conversation, out the door. I boxed up what little of his clothing he had left behind, labeling the boxes plainly. Brandon, pick up by Friday or donation. It was not anger that fueled me. It was the simple need to reclaim the space, to strip away the layers he had imposed until it reflected me again. I painted the walls a soft, airy blue. I replaced the heavy curtains with sheer white ones that danced in the breeze. Each small change felt like pulling out splinters I had lived with for too long, hardly realizing how deeply they had embedded themselves. Natalie kept me updated on the divorce proceedings. "It is going smoothly," she said during one of our calls. "Brandon is too scared to fight. He knows he has no leverage." I thanked her quietly, grateful not just for her legal expertise, but for her steady friendship. "You are doing better than most," she added. "Stronger." I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. "I feel stronger," I said, and it was true. For so long I had been shrinking, making myself smaller to avoid Brandon's criticism, his indifference, his casual cruelty. Now I felt myself expanding again, taking up space, owning it. On Saturday afternoon, I sat in the garden with a notebook sketching plans for the landscaping. As I worked, my neighbor Mrs. Henderson wandered over with her little poodle in tow. "I heard about what happened," she said gently, sitting down beside me. "I am sorry, Meredith." I looked at her, the kindness in her lined face, and felt a pang of gratitude. "Thank you," I said, "but honestly, I am not." She tilted her head curiously. "I lost a liar," I said, smiling, "but I found myself—" She laughed, patting my hand. "Good for you, dear. Not everyone gets the chance to start over." I thought about that long after she left. Starting over was not a punishment. It was a gift. That evening I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room, surrounded by the fresh scent of new paint and the soft glow of fairy lights I had strung along the mantel. I felt at peace in a way I had not in years. There would be challenges ahead, I knew. Finalizing the divorce, figuring out the financial aftermath Brandon had left behind, but for the first time the future felt like something I wanted to run toward, not something I dreaded, and it was mine, all mine. A week later, Brandon showed up one last time. I heard the knock while I was planting hydrangeas in the front garden, my hands stained with fresh earth. I wiped them on a towel and opened the door. There he stood, disheveled, wearing the same jacket I remembered from the early days when I thought he was someone worth trusting. In his hands, he held a cardboard box, the last of his things. "Thought I would drop these off," he said, avoiding my eyes. I stepped aside without a word, letting him place the box inside the doorway. It felt fitting somehow, a quiet, anticlimactic ending to something that had burned so loudly when it fell apart. As he lingered awkwardly in the entryway, I crossed my arms, waiting. "You look good," he said finally, voice low. I raised an eyebrow. He shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to say I'm sorry," he mumbled. "For everything." For a moment old instincts stirred, the part of me that used to want to fix things, to make peace. But I let the silence stretch between us, cool and unbroken, because I was no longer that woman, and he was no longer my problem. "I hope you find whatever it is you are looking for, Brandon," I said finally, my voice steady. He nodded, looking smaller somehow, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up to him. Without another word, he turned and walked down the path, out of my life for good. I closed the door behind him, locking it with a sense of finality. Then I carried the box straight to the garage, placing it neatly next to the others waiting for donation pickup. I would not keep any remnants of a life built on lies. Later that evening I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of tea and opened the final paperwork from Natalie. The divorce was finalized. The house was officially, irrevocably mine. No lingering ties, no open wounds, just clean, fresh freedom. I signed the last page with a steady hand, feeling the ink dry under my fingertips like a quiet promise. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the farmer's market. I bought armfuls of fresh flowers, sunflowers, tulips, roses, and spent the afternoon filling the house with them. Vases on every windowsill, bouquets on the mantelpiece, little jars of blossoms brightening every corner. The house smelled like hope, like new beginnings. That evening I invited a few friends over, Natalie of course, and my neighbor Mrs. Henderson, along with a couple of colleagues who had stood by me through the mess. We sat on the back porch under strings of fairy lights, drinking wine and laughing. The air was warm and sweet, the sky a deep velvet blue studded with stars. At one point Natalie raised her glass. "To Meredith," she said, her smile wide and proud, "for reminding all of us that sometimes the greatest revenge is living well." Everyone clinked glasses and I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, but a genuine, light-hearted sound that felt like it had been waiting inside me for years. We talked late into the night, swapping stories, making plans for the future. As I watched my friends' faces glow under the soft lights, I realized something simple and powerful. I had not just survived, I had flourished. And the best part was that this was only the beginning. Spring melted into summer. The garden I had once only dreamed of became a reality. A riot of color and scent, with butterflies drifting lazily from bloom to bloom. Inside, the house transformed too, not with grand renovations but with smaller, more meaningful changes. Photographs of friends and trips adorned the shelves where Brandon's trophies once stood. Books I loved lined the walls of the study, a cozy retreat I never allowed myself before. Soft rugs, warm lamps, spaces created with intention and care. Each corner of the house whispered one clear message now: you are free. One afternoon I sat by the front window with a journal in my lap, thinking back over the past year. It was startling to realize how far I had come. The Meredith who had answered that devastating phone call months ago was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced betrayal without losing her compassion, who had endured humiliation without surrendering her dignity, who had built a life not out of spite, but out of self-respect and courage. I closed my journal, a quiet smile on my lips. The past would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined the ending. Later that week I received an invitation to speak at a local business women's conference. At first I hesitated. Was my story even worth telling? Would people really want to hear about a woman who fought back quietly without drama or spectacle? But then I thought about the countless women out there who had been made to feel small, disposable, invisible. Maybe hearing that survival was not about shouting the loudest, but about standing the firmest, could matter. Maybe it already had. On the day of the conference I wore a simple navy dress and minimal jewelry. No armor, no mask, just me. When I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded me, but as I spoke the fear fell away. I told them the truth, how betrayal had nearly shattered me, how I had chosen dignity over revenge, how starting over had been terrifying but ultimately beautiful. I ended with a simple message. Sometimes the life you are meant to live is hiding on the other side of the life you thought you wanted. Trust yourself enough to find it. The applause that rose up was warm, heartfelt, real. That night, as I walked home under a sky ablaze with stars, I realized something simple and powerful. Brandon had believed he could define my worth by what he could take from me. He had believed he held all the cards. That one phone call, one betrayal, could erase everything I was. He had been wrong, because the thing he never understood was this: real strength is quiet, real victories are patient, and the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is peace. It is freedom. It is living a life so full, so honest, so radiant, that betrayal becomes nothing more than a chapter in a story that ends in triumph.